It started innocently enough, or so I thought. I was sitting at the kitchen table, enjoying my morning coffee and skimming through our joint bank account statements online. Claire, my wife of 12 years, had just left for work at her marketing job. She kissed me goodbye like always, quick, warm, and familiar, but something about her lately had felt off. I'm a numbers guy, and I run my own accounting firm from home. Patterns and anomalies jump out at me like red flags in a sea of numbers. That's why, when I noticed a series of unfamiliar transactions over the past 3 months, I couldn't just brush them off. Expensive dinners at high-end restaurants neither of us frequented. Hotel bookings in our city. And the last straw, a $3,000 charge at a luxury jewelry store. I felt the coffee grow cold in my hands as a knot formed in my stomach. I knew Claire hadn't bought any jewelry for me. Her gift-giving had become far more practical in recent years. So who was it for? I confronted Claire when she came home that evening, keeping my voice as calm as possible. Hey, noticed some weird transactions in the bank account. Mind helping me figure them out? She froze, just for a split second, before her usual warm smile returned. Weird? Like what? Hotel stays. A charge at Goldwyn's Jewelry. Pretty fancy stuff for us. Huh? Her laugh was too loud, too forced. Oh, that. I've been helping Joy, my boss, with a project. It's nothing, babe. She'll reimburse me once the budget clears. Helping Joy with a jewelry purchase? I pressed, raising an eyebrow. She was picking out a gift for a client, Claire said quickly. Wanted a second opinion. You know how she is. I didn't want to bother you with it. Her explanation seemed plausible, but my gut told me something was wrong. Still, I decided to let it slide for now. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I thought about the extra hours Claire had been working. Her new obsession with her appearance, workout classes, hair appointments, even a fresh wardrobe. It all lined up too perfectly, though I hated where my thoughts were leading. The next morning, I started digging. I found the hotel's number and called, pretending to confirm a reservation. They confirmed the dates of the stay matched the charges. Claire's name was on the booking. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. I knew I couldn't confront her again, not without proof. If my suspicions were right, I needed to catch her in the act. But how? Hiring a private investigator seemed like overkill, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. And then it hit me, the joint bank account. If Claire was careless enough to leave a trail of charges, she might be leaving other clues behind. The jewelry purchase haunted me. Who was it for? Was there someone else? Or was my imagination running wild, fueled by stress and paranoia? I needed answers, but I wasn't ready for the truth to unravel just yet. After my discovery, it was hard to act normal around Claire. Every smile she gave me felt like a test. Every hug a question I couldn't answer. Was she lying? Was I overthinking this? The uncertainty was eating me alive. I needed clarity, and I needed it fast. That night, after she went to bed, I sat in my office and opened my laptop. The jewelry charge gnawed at me the most. It felt deliberate, personal. I searched the name of the store, Goldwyn's Jewelry, and found their website. A live chat window popped up in the corner of the screen, offering assistance. Bingo! I hesitated before typing. Pretending to be Claire felt wrong, but I justified it to myself. If she was lying, didn't I deserve the truth? If she wasn't, then no harm done. Hi! I made a purchase a few weeks ago and misplaced the receipt. I typed. Could you help me confirm the details? Within seconds, the reply came, Of course. Could you provide the name and date of the transaction? I entered Claire's name and the date listed on the statement. A few moments later, the response came through. Yes, I see it here. A custom order, platinum bracelet with an engraved message. Would you like the inscription details? My stomach dropped. Custom order? Engraving? My fingers hovered over the keyboard before I typed back, Yes, please. The response came swiftly. It reads, Forever yours, Jay. My heart thudded in my chest as the words sank in. Forever yours? And who the hell was Jay? The next morning, Claire was her usual chipper self. She hummed as she packed her bag for work, kissing me on the cheek before heading out. I watched her drive away, my mind reeling. There was no joy at her office. No reimbursement waiting to explain this away. The engraving was intimate, romantic. It didn't add up. I needed more evidence, so I decided to take things further. A private investigator felt like overkill, but technology was my ally. That afternoon, I bought a GPS tracker and a small voice recorder online. Discreet, effective, and easy enough to hide. I figured if Claire was sneaking around, these would catch her in the act. 2 days later, the gadgets arrived. I waited until Claire was in the shower before slipping the GPS tracker into her car. It was tiny, magnetized, and tucked away where she'd never notice it. The voice recorder was even easier. I slipped it into her work bag, nestled between her laptop and planner. Trust but verify, I muttered to myself as I stepped back, my heart pounding at the thought of what I was doing. But this wasn't trust anymore. This was survival. Later that week, the GPS tracker showed her making several stops, all of which she had plausible explanations for. Dinner with a coworker, errands, client meetings, it seemed innocent enough. But the voice recorder told a different story. That night, after Claire went to bed, I retrieved the recorder and listened to the day's conversations. Most of it was mundane conference calls, casual chatter. Then, in the late afternoon, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A man's voice. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow," he said, his tone low and flirtatious. "You've got the green dress ready, right? You know how much I love it." Claire's reply was soft, almost a whisper. "Of course, Jay. Anything for you, Jay." There it was again, the same initial as the engraving. My chest tightened as I heard the sound of laughter. Hers, light and carefree. So different from the strained smiles she gave me lately. The pieces were falling into place, but I wasn't ready to act yet. If I confronted her now, she'd have excuses. She'd twist the narrative. I needed to catch her red-handed. The next morning, as Claire left for work, I tracked her car's location and prepared myself for what was to come. I spent the morning glued to my laptop, the GPS tracker feeding me updates on Claire's every move. It was a normal route at first, her usual commute to the office. Around 11 a.m., though, her car started moving again. Coffee run? Lunch break? I told myself not to jump to conclusions. But then the route took a turn, straight toward the heart of downtown. I opened a new tab and Googled the address. The name that popped up made my stomach twist. Grand Meridian Hotel. She parked there at 11:23 a.m. I refreshed the map every few seconds, waiting to see if she'd leave, but her car stayed put. Minutes ticked by, then an hour. It was clear she wasn't just grabbing a coffee. My mind was racing. Should I go? Confront her? No, that would ruin everything. I needed to be sure. By 12:45 p.m., I couldn't sit still anymore. I grabbed my keys and drove downtown, parking a block away from the Grand Meridian. It was a sleek, upscale building, the kind of place people went to be seen or not seen depending on their purpose. I scanned the lot and found her car parked near the entrance. My hands clenched the steering wheel as I stared at it, my mind filling in the blanks of what might be happening inside. I needed proof. I walked into the lobby, my heart pounding like a war drum. The place was luxurious, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I tried to look casual as I approached the front desk. The woman behind it greeted me with a polished smile. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" I think my wife might be here," I said, trying to sound sheepish. "She told me to meet her, but I think I lost the room number. Can you check for me?" Her smile faltered slightly. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't give out guest information without their permission." Of course. Privacy policies. I was an idiot to think it'd be that easy. "Right, of course," I said, laughing awkwardly. "Thanks anyway." I turned and headed toward the elevators, hoping I looked like I knew where I was going. If Claire was meeting someone here, there had to be a way to find her. The elevators opened, and a group of well-dressed professionals stepped out, chatting about a business deal. I slipped in, punching the button for the top floor. If I couldn't find her by name, maybe I could figure it out by observation. When the elevator doors opened at the top, I stepped out and found myself in a hallway lined with conference rooms. It wasn't what I'd expected, but it gave me an idea. I peeked into a couple of rooms, nothing unusual, just corporate types in meetings. But then I noticed something odd. A man pacing in the hallway, looking around nervously. His suit was sharp, his hair perfectly styled, but there was something about him that screamed out of place. He didn't notice me as I lingered near the elevator, pretending to check my phone. After a few minutes, he slipped into a room. I waited until the door clicked shut, then walked past casually, glancing through the small window. My breath caught. Claire was inside. She was sitting at a table with the man, laughing softly as he leaned closer. Her body language was familiar, too familiar. The kind of familiarity we used to share. I stepped back before I could be seen, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to burst in, to demand answers, but I held myself back. Not yet. I still didn't know everything. When I got back to my car, I couldn't sit still. I drove aimlessly for a while, replaying what I'd seen. Was that Jay? Her lover? Or was this just a business meeting that looked worse than it was? My head swam with doubt, anger, and pain. Back home, I downloaded the GPS logs and audio from the recorder in her bag. I needed more details before making my next move. Sure enough, her conversations revealed plans to meet again. This Friday night, at another hotel. The Regency Suites. I stared at the data, my jaw tightening. This was it. I'd catch them in the act, and there'd be no escaping the truth. Friday arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. Every time I saw Claire that week, my stomach twisted with dread and anger. She had no idea I was onto her, which made it all the more surreal when she kissed me goodbye that morning, smiling like everything was fine. Busy day at work? I asked casually. Insanely busy, she replied, grabbing her bag. I might be late tonight. Don't wait up. Don't wait up. The words felt like a knife twisting in my chest. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. This was the night. I had mapped out the plan meticulously. I had backup for everything, GPS logs, voice recordings, and now, I was about to get the most damning piece of evidence yet. Catching her red-handed. The Regency Suites wasn't far from downtown. I arrived a little after 7 p.m. and parked my car across the street, out of sight. Her GPS tracker showed she had arrived a few minutes earlier. I adjusted the baseball cap and hoodie I'd thrown on as a makeshift disguise. The last thing I wanted was for her to recognize me too soon. I slipped into the hotel lobby, keeping to the edges. It was quieter than I'd expected, but that worked in my favor. I'd done my homework earlier in the day, learning the layout of the hotel. Her room number had popped up in one of the conversations I'd recorded earlier. Room 418. The elevator ride felt like it lasted an eternity. My pulse was racing, my palms clammy as I stepped into the hallway. Room 418 was at the far end. I walked past it casually, not stopping, but I could hear faint voices behind the door. Hers. And a man's. I retreated to the stairwell and waited. My plan was simple. When the moment was right, I'd knock on the door and force them to confront the truth. But as I stood there, I realized I might need more than just my word against theirs. That's when I remembered the small digital recorder I tucked into my pocket before leaving home. I crept back toward the room, my footsteps silent against the carpet. Kneeling near the door, I pressed record and slipped the device onto the floor, just under the edge of the doorframe. At first, all I could hear was muffled laughter. Then the man's voice came through, clearer than I expected. "You're incredible, Claire," he said. "I can't believe we've been doing this for 3 years and haven't been caught." 3 years. My vision blurred with rage. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stay quiet. Claire's voice followed, soft and playful. "Well, you're worth the risk, Jay. You always have been." I couldn't wait any longer. I straightened up, raised my hand, and knocked. For a moment, there was only silence. Then hurried footsteps. The door cracked open slightly, just enough for a man's face to appear. Sharp suit, expensive cologne, and a smirk that vanished the moment he saw me. "Who the hell are you?" he asked. I pushed the door open, forcing my way inside. Claire was standing by the bed, her face pale as a ghost. She was dressed in that green dress I'd overheard her mention, the one he loved so much. "Surprise?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Mind if I join the party?" Claire's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Jay, her boss as it turned out, stood frozen, clearly unsure of what to do. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice rising. 3 years, Claire? 3 goddamn years. She stammered, her hands shaking. This isn't what it looks like. Save it." I snapped, cutting her off. "I've got everything, GPS logs, audio recordings, bank statements. You're not talking your way out of this." Her boss tried to step forward, but I turned on him. "And you're her boss, right? How professional of you. Hope your wife enjoys the evidence I'll be sending her." That wiped the smirk off his face. Claire burst into tears, pleading with me to calm down. But I wasn't interested in her excuses. I turned and left, ignoring her cries to come back. I didn't trust myself to stay in that room another second. As I drove home, my hands trembling on the wheel, I realized this wasn't over. This confrontation was just the beginning. The drive home was a blur. My mind spun with everything I just witnessed. Claire's tear-streaked face, her boss's stunned silence, and that damned green dress she'd worn for him. The 3 years she'd lied, pretended, and played the role of a loving wife unraveled in my mind like a film reel from hell. When I got home, the house felt eerie, like the calm before a storm. I paced the living room, adrenaline still coursing through me. What now? Divorce was the obvious answer, but it wasn't that simple. There were financial entanglements, the house, and, most painfully, the life we'd built together. About an hour later, Claire came home. She looked disheveled, her makeup smeared, her eyes red and swollen from crying. As she walked in, she froze at the sight of me standing in the middle of the room, arms crossed. "Jack," she began, her voice trembling. "Don't." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "I don't want your apologies, your excuses, or your lies. I want the truth, Claire. For once in 3 years. Just give me that." She set her bag down slowly, her movements tentative, as if afraid I might explode. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she said quietly. "That's not an answer." Claire sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. "It started when I got that promotion," she admitted, her voice muffled. "I was working late, traveling more, and he noticed me. He made me feel." "Don't you dare say special," I snapped. "You mean he made you feel like cheating on your husband wasn't a complete betrayal?" Her head shot up, her eyes wide. "It wasn't about you, Jack. It was about me. I was. Spare me the therapy session," I yelled, my voice echoing through the house. "You had a choice. Every single time you chose him. Don't act like this was out of your control." She started sobbing, but I didn't feel sympathy. Not anymore. I grabbed my laptop from the counter and opened the folder where I'd saved all the evidence. The GPS logs, voice recordings, and even the audio from earlier that night. "You see this?" I said, spinning the screen toward her. "This is everything. I have proof of every lie you've told. Every time you sneaked around behind my back." Her face turned pale as she stared at the screen. "Jack, please, don't ruin us like this." "Ruin us? Ruin us? You already did that, Claire. The minute you walked into that hotel room with him, you destroyed everything we had." She sat there, sobbing, but I didn't stop. "I'm filing for divorce. First thing Monday. And don't think for a second you're walking away from this unscathed. Your boss? Oh, his wife's getting a copy of this too." Claire's sobs turned to pleas. "Please, Jack, don't do this. I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I love you." "Stop," I shouted, my chest heaving. "You don't love me. You love the convenience of me, the comfort I provided while you lived your double life." I turned and headed upstairs, leaving her alone in the living room. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. As I closed the bedroom door behind me, I heard her muffled sobs continue, but I felt nothing. this wasn't over. The confrontation was just the first step. Now came the hard part. Unraveling the life we'd built together and figuring out how to start over. But one thing was certain, there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up to an empty house. Claire's car was gone, and her side of the bed hadn't been touched. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she'd gone to him. Maybe she thought they could figure out how to salvage their sordid little fantasy. Fine by me. The silence was exactly what I needed to think clearly. I spent the morning preparing for what came next. First, I emailed a divorce attorney I'd researched the night before. The email was simple but packed with details. My evidence, my intention to move forward, and a request for a consultation. By noon, I'd received a reply. They were ready to meet the following day. Next, I focused on her boss, Jay. I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. His smug face haunted me. The way he had looked so confident when he opened the hotel door. I drafted an email to his wife. I'd met her once, briefly, at a work function. Claire dragged me to a couple of years back. Her name was Linda and she seemed nice, charming even. She didn't deserve to be kept in the dark about what was happening. The email was short and direct. Hi Linda, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I believe you deserve to know the truth. My wife, Claire, has been having an affair with your husband, Jay. Attached is proof I've gathered, including audio recordings and evidence from last night. I'm truly sorry to have to share this, but you deserve to know what's going on. I attached the files and hit send before I could overthink it. Around mid-afternoon, Claire came home. She looked exhausted, her hair disheveled and her eyes swollen from crying. Where were you? I asked coldly. I stayed at a friend's place, she muttered, avoiding my gaze. Not his place. Her head snapped up. No, Jack. I wouldn't. Save it. I cut her off. I don't care where you were. You're not staying here tonight. Pack a bag and leave. Jack, please, she pleaded. We need to talk. There's nothing to talk about, Claire. I've already started the divorce process. And just so you know, I sent everything to his wife. So if he didn't tell her, she knows now. Her face turned white. You didn't. Oh, I did, I said, my voice ice cold. You want to destroy lives? Congratulations. Yours just made the list. She packed quickly, tears streaming down her face as she shoved clothes into a duffel bag. She tried to talk to me again before leaving, but I didn't listen. As far as I was concerned, she was just a stranger standing in my living room. When the door closed behind her, I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That night, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from Linda, Jay's wife. Jack, thank you for reaching out, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I've reviewed the evidence, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate your honesty. I'm taking steps on my end to deal with Jay. If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. Her message brought a small sense of vindication. At least someone else now knew the full extent of their betrayal. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal meetings and paperwork. Claire had gone radio silent, staying somewhere unknown. I didn't ask questions. My lawyer assured me we were in a strong position, thanks to the mountain of evidence I'd gathered. But just when I thought I had control over the situation, things took an unexpected turn. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello, Jack, it's Linda. Her voice was sharp, urgent. Linda, is everything okay? No, she said, her tone clipped. You need to hear this. Jay's been talking, and it turns out this wasn't just some affair. There's something bigger going on. Something I think you need to know. Linda's words sent a chill down my spine. What do you mean, something bigger? I asked, gripping my phone tighter. She hesitated for a moment before replying, her voice tense. Jay and Claire weren't just having an affair. They were funneling money. Jay admitted it during our argument earlier today. He said it wasn't just about the affair, that they were partners in everything. Funneling money? I echoed, my mind racing. What are you talking about? There's been a series of suspicious transactions at his firm, Linda explained. Jay hinted that Claire helped him. He didn't give details, but from the way he talked, it's serious. Like fraud serious. I thought you'd want to know since it might involve your finances too. My breath hitched. Claire handled our household bills and had access to our joint accounts. If she'd been helping Jay move money. Linda, I said, my voice low. If this is true, I need to know everything. Did he say anything else? Anything specific? Not yet, but I'm meeting with my lawyer tomorrow, she replied. I'll press him for more details. You should check your accounts in the meantime. If Claire was involved, it might not just be about his firm. It could affect you personally. As soon as I hung up, I went straight to my computer and logged into our joint accounts. At first, everything looked normal, our usual expenses, mortgage payments, groceries. But when I checked the savings account, my stomach dropped. There it was. A $25,000 transfer to an account I didn't recognize. It was labeled as Consulting Fee J Enterprises. My mind flashed back to Claire's explanation about helping Joy, her boss, with business expenses. It had all been a lie. She hadn't been helping Joy. She'd been covering for Jay and using our money to do it. I scrolled further, my hands trembling. Smaller transactions popped up. $5,000 here, $10,000 there, all transferred to the same account over the past year. I called my lawyer immediately. I think there's financial fraud involved. I told her, my voice shaky. My wife's been transferring money to someone, and I have no idea where it's going. Her tone was calm but firm. This changes things. We'll need to dig into her financial records. If she's been using marital assets for illegal activities, it could work in your favor during the divorce. Illegal activities? I repeated, the words sounding foreign. If these funds were part of a larger scheme, Claire could be liable, both civilly and criminally. But we need hard evidence. Do you have access to her personal accounts? I didn't, but I knew where to find it. Claire had always been careless with passwords, and I had a good idea where she might have stored them. The next day, while Claire was still gone, I searched the house. Her laptop was in her home office, buried under a stack of magazines. Sure enough, a sticky note on the inside cover of her planner had a list of logins and passwords. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Her personal bank account showed even more damning evidence. Thousands of dollars moving in and out, often linked to accounts under Jay's name. But that wasn't the worst part. Buried deep in her email inbox, I found a series of messages between her and Jay. They were encrypted, but the subject lines hinted at something far worse than an affair. Invoice adjustments, Project Redwood. Urgent, tax evasion risk. New account setup instructions. My head swam as I realized this wasn't just infidelity. This was criminal. I forwarded everything to my lawyer and sat back, trying to process what I'd uncovered. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was helping Jay run some kind of financial scheme, and our accounts were tangled in it. By the time Claire came home that evening, I was ready. She walked through the door cautiously, as if she could sense the tension in the air. Jack, can we talk? I was sitting at the dining room table, laptop open, the incriminating emails displayed on the screen. Oh, we're going to talk, I said coldly. But first, why don't you explain these? Her face went pale as she approached and saw the emails. Jack, I can explain. No more lies, Claire. I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. You've been stealing from me, from us. And for what? To cover for that scumbag boss of yours. Tears welled up in her eyes. It's not what you think. Jay, he pressured me into it. He said he'd ruin my career if I didn't help him. You expect me to believe that? I barked. You had a choice. Just like with the affair, you chose him. And now you've dragged me into this mess. Do you have any idea what you've done? She collapsed into a chair, sobbing. Jack, please. I didn't mean for it to get this far. I didn't know how to stop. I stood, my voice steady now. Well, you've stopped now. My lawyer has everything. The bank records, the emails, every single lie you've told. You're on your own, Claire. And when the authorities come knocking, I won't lift a finger to help you. Her sobs filled the room as I walked upstairs, slamming the bedroom door behind me. I barely slept that night, the weight of everything I'd uncovered. The affair, the fraud, the money siphoned out of our accounts, pressed down on me like a lead blanket. Claire's sobbing downstairs eventually faded, replaced by an eerie silence that gnawed at me. The next morning, I called my lawyer to update her on the new evidence. She advised me to file a formal report with the police. "If this goes criminal, you need to protect yourself," she said. "We'll emphasize that you were unaware of her actions. The sooner we create a paper trail, the better." By noon, I was sitting in a sterile conference room at the police station, recounting everything to a detective named Harris. He listened intently, occasionally jotting notes in his worn leather notebook. "So, to summarize," he said, leaning back in his chair, "your wife has been transferring large sums of money to her boss, potentially tied to fraudulent activities at his company. And you only discovered this after uncovering her affair." I nodded, feeling the sting of humiliation all over again. "That's right. I have the bank statements, emails, and recordings to back it up." Harris gave a low whistle. "Well, Mr. Carter, you've done half our job for us. I'll need copies of everything. If what you're saying is true, this isn't just marital drama, it's white-collar crime." When I got home, Claire was still there, curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. She didn't even flinch when I walked in. "The police know," I said flatly. "You should prepare yourself. This is going to get ugly." Her head snapped toward me, panic flooding her face. "You went to the police? What did you expect me to do, Claire?" I shot back. "Sit around while you drag me into your mess? They're going to come after you and Jay. And trust me, I'll make sure they know I had no part in this." "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Jay said it was harmless, that it was just creative accounting. I didn't know it would spiral into this." "Stop playing the victim," I said coldly. "You knew exactly what you were doing, just like you knew what you were doing every time you walked into a hotel room with him." The next few days were a whirlwind. The police launched an official investigation into Jay's company, and Claire's involvement quickly became clear. Linda, Jay's wife, reached out to me again, sharing that Jay had been served with a warrant. "He's panicking," she said during our phone call. "And honestly, I hope he burns for this." It wasn't long before detectives showed up at the house. Claire had gone out for groceries, or so she said, when they arrived with a search warrant. They combed through her office, seizing her laptop, files, and even her phone. One detective turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Carter, were you aware of these transactions at the time they occurred?" "No," I replied firmly. "I only found out recently, after noticing discrepancies in our accounts." He nodded, satisfied, before leaving with the evidence. That evening, Claire came home to find her office in disarray and a sense of dread hanging in the air. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They came for your stuff," I said, crossing my arms. "They're building a case, Claire. I hope you've got a good lawyer." She sank into the nearest chair, her hands shaking. "Jack, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would get this far." You made your choices," I interrupted, my voice hard. "Now you'll deal with the consequences." As the investigation deepened, it became clear that Jay was the mastermind behind the fraud. He had been embezzling funds and laundering money through shell companies, and Claire had been complicit in moving the cash. The $25,000 from our account was just the tip of the iceberg. I filed for an immediate separation, refusing to let her drag me down any further. My lawyer assured me that the evidence I'd provided would help shield me from liability, but it didn't make the betrayal sting any less. The final blow came a week later. I received a call from Linda, her voice tinged with satisfaction. "They arrested him," she said. "Jay's in custody. And your wife, she's next. They're coming for her, Jack." I hung up the phone, staring out the window. The storm was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of a lie I'd been living for far too long. The day Claire was arrested felt surreal. I hadn't prepared myself for the moment, even though I knew it was inevitable. When the police arrived at the house that morning, She was in the kitchen making coffee. She glanced at the officers on the doorstep, her face going pale. "Jack?" she called, her voice trembling. I didn't move from where I stood in the living room. "They're not here for me, Claire." One of the officers stepped forward. "Claire Carter, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and embezzlement." Her mug slipped from her hand, shattering on the tile floor. "Wait, no, this can't be happening," she cried, backing away. They recited her rights as they cuffed her, their voices calm and practiced. Her panic-filled eyes locked onto mine, silently begging for help, but I just stood there, arms crossed. "Jack, please!" she sobbed as they led her out the door. I followed them outside, watching as they put her in the back of the squad car. Our neighbors peeked out from behind curtains and doorways, whispering to each other. As the car drove off, I let out a shaky breath. Claire was gone, and with her went the last thread tying me to the disaster she'd created. Over the next few weeks, the fallout spread like wildfire. News of Jay's fraudulent activities and Claire's involvement hit the local papers. The scandal was splashed across headlines. CEO and employee caught in $1 million embezzlement scheme. At first, I thought I'd feel vindicated, but all I felt was exhaustion. Friends and coworkers started calling, asking questions I didn't want to answer. Some were supportive, others less so. "Why didn't you stop her?" one old college friend had the nerve to ask. "Do you think I knew?" I snapped. "She lied to me too." My lawyer worked tirelessly to keep me insulated from the case. Thankfully, the police believed my story. Between the evidence I provided and my cooperation, I was treated as a victim rather than a co-conspirator. But the emotional toll was immense. Nights were the hardest, when the house was too quiet and the memories crept in. The life Claire and I had built together felt like a cruel joke, a facade hiding her betrayals. I reached out to a therapist, something I never thought I'd do. It helped little by little. I talked about the anger, the betrayal, and the shame. Then came the day of her arraignment. I didn't plan to go. I wanted nothing to do with her anymore. But curiosity got the better of me. I sat in the back of the courtroom trying to blend in. When they brought Claire out, she looked broken. Her once perfect hair was limp, her face pale and gaunt. She avoided looking at the crowd, her shoulders hunched as if she could shrink into herself and disappear. The charges were read out loud. Conspiracy, embezzlement, fraud. When asked how she pleaded, her voice barely carried across the room. "Not guilty, Your Honor." I felt a wave of bitterness. Even now, she couldn't own up to what she'd done. After the hearing, I ran into Linda outside the courthouse. She looked better than the last time we'd spoken. Calmer, more in control. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her tone genuinely concerned. I shrugged. "Better, I guess. How about you?" "Relieved," she admitted. "Jay's lawyer is already trying to negotiate a plea deal. He'll probably throw Claire under the bus to save himself." I shook my head, unsurprised. "They deserve each other." Linda smiled faintly. "If you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." Over the next few months, Claire's world unraveled. Jay turned on her completely, providing evidence that cemented her role in the fraud. Her lawyer fought hard, but the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. When her sentencing day came, I didn't bother attending. I already knew the outcome. Claire had destroyed her life, and there was no coming back from it. By the time the dust settled, I'd sold the house and moved to a new city. It was a fresh start, free from the ghosts of my past. Some nights I still thought about Claire. Not with love, but with pity. She had everything. A stable life, a loyal husband, and she threw it all away for someone who saw her as disposable. I wasn't sure what my future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I'd never let anyone betray me like that again. It's been 6 months since Claire was sentenced. She received 4 years in prison after pleading guilty to conspiracy and fraud. Jay managed to cut a deal, walking away with a lighter sentence, but his career and reputation were destroyed. From what I've heard, his wife, Linda, filed for divorce almost immediately after his arrest. I don't blame her. As for me, I've slowly begun to rebuild. Selling the house was harder than I thought, but necessary. Every corner of that place held memories I needed to leave behind. I moved to a smaller, quieter town, rented a modest apartment, and took time off work to figure out who I was outside of the wreckage Claire left behind. About a month ago, I received a letter from Claire. It was short, scrawled in her familiar handwriting, but every word carried the weight of someone desperate for forgiveness. Jack, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I won't ask for it. But I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything. For the lies, the betrayal, and for dragging you into something you never should have been a part of. Prison gives you a lot of time to think, and all I can think about is how much I hurt you. I loved you once, Jack. I hope you believe that. I hope one day you can move on and find happiness again. Claire. I read it twice before putting it away in a drawer. Part of me wanted to reply, to say something, anything, but I couldn't find the words. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, won't happen overnight. And even if it does, it doesn't mean I'd ever let her back into my life. Linda and I have kept in touch. It's funny, two people brought together by the same betrayal. She's been a surprising source of support. Someone who understands the mix of anger and grief that comes with being blindsided like this. Do you think you'll ever trust someone again? She asked me once over coffee. I shrugged. I don't know, but I think I'm learning how to trust myself again, and that feels like a good start. She smiled at that. It is. I've returned to work now, taking on smaller projects and easing back into a routine. It's strange, but I feel lighter, freer than I have in years. The marriage that once felt like a safe harbor had become an anchor, dragging me into depths I didn't even realize I was sinking into. I've started hiking on weekends, a hobby I'd always talked about but never pursued. There's something about standing on a mountaintop, staring out at the vast expanse of trees and sky, that makes everything else feel small, insignificant. It's a reminder that life moves on, no matter how broken you feel. Do I miss her? Sometimes. Not the Claire she became, but the one I thought she was. The woman who laughed at my stupid jokes, who held my hand during scary movies, who made me believe we were invincible. But that woman was a fiction, or maybe just a version of Claire that disappeared along the way. Either way, she's gone, and I've made peace with that. This morning, I stood by the window of my apartment, watching the sunrise. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the heaviness in my chest, the ache of betrayal. Instead, I felt hope, fragile but real. Life goes on, and so will I.